Welcome, everyone, to our Facebook Live broadcast. I'm Steve Altition, Director of Client Partnerships at Pacific Cascade Legal. And today we have one of our family law attorneys, Kimberly Brown, to talk about how criminal charges can impact a divorce case. Hey, Kimberly, how you doing today?
I'm well, Steve. How about yourself?
I am doing well.
Yay.
Kimberly,
Yes.
we're not seeing you. I just want to let you know.
Okay. I'm
Oh, I
I'm
do see
showing.
you now. Nope, I'm good
Okay.
now. I'm good now.
Okay.
For those folks who have not seen you, though, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and why you think this topic actually has some importance?
I'm a family law lawyer. I've been practicing almost 26 years. I'm not old enough to have done that, but that's how long it's been. And throughout my career, I've done mostly family law, and primarily I've worked in kind of custody cases. I do third party custody in a part of a regular divorce. And then the division of assets. I do some probate and guardianship stuff, and I think that I think I think it's easy, I think, to say criminal convictions or crimes that you commit may affect what happens in your divorce. I think that's sort of a no-brainer sort of thing to stay it out, but the ways and how much it can affect it or impact your divorce is, I don't think something that people are either really aware of or really think about, um, other than to throw mud at one another. But there can be
Yeah.
some real consequences
Uh,
to somebody who commits a crime, even before the divorce, but also during the divorce.
yep. Yep. And we're going to talk about that because I'm glad you talked about the before part. It was, like you said, it's really interesting. I mean, when you talk about crime and divorce, the only thing people kind of think about is, well, if I kill my spouse, I guess it's going to shorten the divorce case. But we're not going to talk about that one. But what you do
Although
talk about,
although that's have that I've
although
had
that is
that.
true,
Yes, I've had that.
it's
A
true.
couple of attempts and a
It,
couple of results. It's
yep,
terrible.
yep.
Yeah, that's
Um,
terrible.
but let's start talking about criminal convictions
Okay.
and how a criminal conviction, can interact with your divorce action.
Divorce and custody cases are complex in and of themselves. But then if you have a criminal conviction, it changes the whole landscape, because if a spouse has been involved or a parent has been involved in criminal activities, um, the courts now have the criminal conviction to add to the considerations of their deliberation of what's going to happen, um, during the divorce proceedings, what's going to happen during temporary orders, as the divorce proceedings are 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 happening, and then how if at all, is it going to affect the entire process? Um, and it's really important that people stop and think, um, what's the consequences of my action, whether it rises to a level of a crime or that you don't get charged for it or you do get charged to it. The choices matter, and people will it's very rare in a divorce situation that if something negative impacts the case, that it's not brought to the court's attention. Some is admissible, especially criminal convictions are admissible to the court, and some are not, and that is that if you've been arrested but not convicted, and the charges were dismissed or something, that may not be used as part of your divorce proceedings. But convictions affect every part of the divorce: child custody, child support, spousal support, and property division.
Yeah. Yeah. The the kind of range that you talked about is really interesting because my next question is sort of like, not all crimes are the same, are they? Some
No,
can have different effect, different things, less or more
right,
effect.
right. The court's gonna, depending on the issues before the court's gonna look at when was the crime committed, what type of crime was it, how does that impact, that conviction impact your ability to work, what kinds of jobs you can get, um, uh, who was who was or what was the relationship, of the victim to the offender. So if the spouse, if it was a spouse, if your spouse has been convicted of a crime and it was against his prior spouse or against his children or against other family members, that may have more impact than brawling in a bar for situations that often come up. That's an example that sometimes comes up that may not have the same impact as, abuse against a family member. And then, what has the person who's been convicted of a crime, what have they done to rehabilitate themselves, and address, if there's a root issue underneath, anger management classes if you've been in an abusive relationship, and have you taken the anger management courses, and has there happened anything in this relationship versus if it was a prior relationship? So,
That that kind of leads to you were talking about a crime that you committed even before divorce. I mean,
mhm,
so if for instance, I was convicted of, hitting somebody 5 years ago, um, that may not be or may be as relevant as if I did it, after the divorce was filed.
yeah. The impact of something 5 years ago again is determined mostly by the totality of the circumstances. Was the hitting somebody your prior spouse or your children, or
Yeah.
was it a bar brawl? If there were drug crimes that were 5 years ago, if you're not using drugs now and you went through treatment and you're continuing to maintain your soberness or your cleanness, then it might not have as much impact on the case as if you committed a drug crime either just before the divorce or during the divorce. And I do want to point out one thing, that we need to remember that crimes after divorce can come back and affect your custody and spousal support issues
Yep.
too. So we just want to keep that in mind. If you've been convicted of a DUI or something under the influence and you've lost your license, or if you haven't lost your license, if there is any risk that you're going to be driving with children in the car while you are intoxicated, that's going to affect your parenting time. Um, if you've abused, assaulted, or there's any kind of sexual violence that's near to or recent to the or during the divorce, that is just going to impact all sorts of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
Tax fraud, you know, are
There,
you
people
going to
don't think of that.
yeah. So yeah, what is the crime, and when was the crime, and what have you done to take care of it? And I've seen people who have put the work in a situation where I thought that for one instance that comes to my mind, a meth addiction that was still, the person was still involved in meth at the beginning of our case, but at the end of our case, I was able to show that this person had chosen their children over their drug addiction. That
Yeah.
doesn't happen very often, but the judge was impressed by that, and given the other circumstances in the relationship and what was before the court, my client actually got custody in that situation. Not often does that happen, but I mean, it can impact it really strongly. But then how you deal with it and try to make amends or clean yourself up or rehabilitate is really important. Um,
Yeah. I imagine that it is, not just looking at it from the legal, what will a judge do,
mhm,
but looking at it from, co-parenting, negotiation,
right,
just working together. I mean, that can
right,
affect that. And I guess both sides need to know this
mhm,
information because,
right,
you can't say you did something 14 years ago, so I get this.
right. And I think there's a lot of mythology out there about um, what happens if a person is accused
Yeah.
of doing something, because unfortunately there are instances, and they're not common or as common as people think they are. There are instances where a spouse will accuse the other parent of criminal activities, um, in hopes to gain a a stronger ground in the proceedings. But I think judges and lawyers are pretty attuned to trying to scope it out, whether it's somebody who's just angry and throwing mud, or is it something that really needs to be paid attention to. But a spouse's criminal record can, if a person cannot get a job that is sufficient to support the children or pay spousal support, then the court may look at the assets and decide to divide the assets so that the person who's got the majority of the child care costs, taking care of the kids for rent, electricity, food, sports activities, excuse me, the court might say, well, since the spouse's criminal activities interferes with their ability to pay the support that we would normally order in a case like this, then we might give more of assets that can be that might be income producing or that could be sold so that that parent has more resources at hand.
Yeah.
And and of course, if there's assault against your spouse or your children, and it is especially if it's a convicted crime and it's clear that it has been something that has not been addressed at all by the perpetrator, gaining custody or even parenting time without supervision, and sometimes not even that, is going to be very, very difficult.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the like a FAPA case, if there's a restraining order that can be put on, not only is that just a sort of the normal decree stuff, that's a whole nother level of not being able to see your kids or
Right,
interact
right,
with your spouse or anything.
right. And I don't think that when people violate, when a restraining order is put on, basically, you're supposed to stay 150 feet away from the person, depending on some of the other conditions that are filled out and that the judge signs off on in the restraining order. You're not supposed to like harass or stalk or sometimes even call on the phone or email, or use third parties to communicate with the other person. And I think that sometimes the person who the restraining order is against does not think about, if I violate this restraining order, I'm going to get arrested. I'm going to be charged with violating the restraining order, and if I've done anything that's of any kind of hitting or anything like that, I'm going to be charged with assault. And and the fact that I did that, the actions themselves are going to be at issue in the divorce. You hit somebody. I'm not sure that you should see your children if you can't not hit somebody. But also, if you violate a restraining order, what you are saying to the general audience that for your divorce, your lawyers and to judges if they come in, or mediators, is you're not able to follow a court order. You have this
Yeah.
court order and you've chosen not to follow it. The court's going to be very careful about how they craft the divorce or custody proceedings to make sure that a person who's not inclined to follow the order has little opportunity to violate the order by how they divide stuff or they make decisions on that. And we use it as a FAPA thing, but often when there's been a criminal conviction, there's probation limitations, who you can speak with, how you can interact with the business that you stole from, or those sort of things. And so probation violations are very similar in terms of their impact on a divorce proceeding if somebody violates the probation.
Yeah, yeah. And the ones that kind of I have talked with people and they're like, "Oh, I don't understand this," because it's not really a crime. I mean, it's kind of thing is like a driving while suspended, or driving recklessly. I mean, there are even lower forms of stuff, but if you lose your license and your ability to drive, that can be just as bad as going to jail. I mean,
Right.
if you can't see your kids because you can't drive.
Right. And yeah, because then that shifts the burden of all the transportation falling on the other spouse, if the court allows you to have parenting time because they trust you enough that if you've already violated a driving while suspended, or and you've ignored that you don't have a license, why would they trust that if the kids are in your care and you want to go to the grocery store or the movie, that you won't pop your kids into the car and taken to movie, even though your
Yeah.
license is still suspended. And also, if the spouse has to do all of the other transportation, it may change. There may be a deviation in child support or spousal support to reimburse the cost of the gas that, and the wear and tear on the vehicle for doing all of the transportation.
Yep. Yep.
So,
You had talked about, well, if it's not a conviction, maybe it isn't admissible, but can let's say someone has, allegedly has committed a
mhm,
crime,
mhm,
but they're waiting, and they may not have a hearing for the next year and a half.
yeah.
Those actions that person did, can that be can testified to in front of a
Well,
judge?
the not the person who is waiting for the trial, the person who allegedly committed the crime, um, they cannot be compelled to testify because they
Correct.
have a Fifth Amendment right to not testify. And anything you say under oath in any court is able to be used in a different trial. So
Yeah.
so often, if the trial does go forward, the person who is the non-criminal spouse, let's just use that for, they will bring it up and say, there's a pending DUI charge, or there's a pending embezzlement charge, or there's a pending abuse charge, and the court can weigh how much that impacts their decision making because the person hasn't been convicted. But the reality of it is, because of the necessity for the person who's waiting a criminal trial, it often just delays the procedure. And I had one case that it took over 4 years. Now that was a little bit of it happened in COVID time, so trials were so delayed that between it took 3 years for the person who was charged with the crime to have his criminal trial. And so we delayed the divorce proceedings and the custody proceedings the whole time, because if he was convicted, it changed the
Yeah.
layout of the divorce. If he wasn't convicted, but there was these allegations, it might have some impact on the divorce. And then the person who was being charged, they should have a right in a divorce case to be able to speak freely, and they cannot do that until the criminal case is done in most
And that could be
instances.
bad for that person. I mean, you're right. Everyone has the right to not testify,
Mhm.
but you know, not testifying, it's very hard for someone listening to
Yeah.
that to say,
Mhm.
okay, I'm really going to throw it out. It
Right,
really is.
right. Yeah.
The
The
I was just going to say
judges
the,
listen.
what about the alcohol thing?
Yeah.
What if,
Oh,
yeah, what if you were, come into court and you're talking about custody, and the one spouse says, well, this person drives our kids around with, drunk, and we've smelled it on their breath, and there's other people that can say that, but there may have been an arrest and there may not.
mhm.
But if the has been an arrest and the person then says, I don't want to testify, I mean, that's going to be a hard position to have to be put in.
Mhm. It is. It is. I think so much of the information is somehow or another the judge weighing this person's evidence and the other person's
Yeah.
evidence. And when you take one person's ability to uh, be fully uh, able to speak about the situation away, the judge only hears this evidence from the person who's not having a pending thing, and it just totally skews the case, because that evidence is what the judge has. They can't. Judges are not allowed to just all of a sudden, and they don't. They don't just say, "Oh, well, I'm sure the other person would testify this." They can't say that. They can only make a decision on what's in front of them, what they have. And
Yeah.
going to the alcohol thing, I think that is one of those situations where conviction, um, or arrest are not necessarily requirements before that kind of evidence comes in.
Yeah.
Um, that somebody drinks every day when they come home from work, and then if they want to go out to dinner and they put the kids in the car, that can be an issue in the case, in the divorce proceeding or the custody proceeding. I will say that we have so many more tools to help us in those situations than we used to have. So if somebody has an alcohol or drug problem, or particularly alcohol, there are devices that we can have the person who's got the alcohol issue have in their possession, which requires them to breathe in every 3 hours while the kids are in their care, and a half hour before they get the kids, and all the rest of that. And it's been a game changer, because now people who really want to see their kids and are really invested in seeing their kids, but have a history of not being able to manage their alcohol issues on a long-term basis, now we have a means where they can blow into something. Both lawyers are informed of the results of the test, and the other spouse or former spouse, is informed of the results of the uh,
Yeah.
of the test. And so parenting time can be interrupted if there's a slip up, but then the spouse who's all worried can see that the person um, is doing well. They're not drinking while the kids are in their possession. And you know, you can't substitute somebody, because the devices now take a picture of the person doing the breathalyzer.
Yeah. That was
So
the old thing. Yeah.
yeah. So
The, you know, harm, physical harm, emotional harm, mental harm, I mean, abuse. Those are one type of crime, obviously,
mm,
and leads to all of this stuff. But there's also that kind of financial crime
right.
and the financial consequences that can be affected. If someone is, you know, cheating on their taxes and gets a, you know, prosecution from the tax division, that could go on one of the person, but not the
Mhm,
other,
mhm,
and really affect even the, like the division of property. You know, what happened if
right,
someone got, you know, got to pay restitution?
right. There's priorities in debt payments, and the IRS is is one of the they've they've got a lot of pull in when they get paid. But if somebody's got huge debts that they're going to have to pay, and for some reason, like taxes are usually not bankruptable, you have to pay the tax debt, and so it may impact spousal support or child support, um, and and uh, and it also, depending on, you know, uh, the the why there was a tax fraud. I mean, there's a whole bunch of different things. Did a person cheat on their taxes through a business? Did they cheat on their personal taxes? Did they embezzle somewhere and forget to put the embezzlement amount of money as part of their income? I mean, all of those things impact uh, how the court looks at the property division. Because if there was a marital waste issue, um, this isn't about taxes, but I had a case one time where a client, the spouse of a client, gambled $320,000 in 1 year, um, in $20 to $50 ATM withdrawals, and refinanced the house to help cover some of the losses and stuff like that. And so uh, that in that particular case, it doesn't always, but in that particular case, the court gave the we call it the lion's share of the property division to the other spouse, because it was appropriate in that case. It doesn't
Yeah.
always. I mean, if somebody's got a gambling debt and they've been using credit cards, and you've been married for 25 years or 20 years or 15 years, and you paid that off 6 months ago or 2 years ago, a lot of times once you get a divorce, people want to go back and
Yeah.
rehash that, you know. And the same with tax fraud. If somebody's been making tax payments because of their embezzlement issues or their business issues, you know, they want to relitigate that. And the courts often won't. They say, you know, those were marital decisions. You decided to be in the marriage and jointly participate in the repayment of the whatever the debt is, or to pay off the credit card debts. And yeah, and people often argue, but I wasn't getting a divorce then, and the courts will say, but you could have, you could have separated right then. And so depending on the time between the conduct and the divorce is really going to impact also what the court or the negotiations do.
Speaking of the time between the conduct and the divorce, I imagine a divorce proceeding just in itself kind of gets, you know, flipped over if someone gets arrested,
Mhm,
goes to jail,
mhm.
and you're trying to do a divorce while one person is in jail. I
Right.
mean, that can't be easy.
It's not. You have to figure out a way to have the person in jail participate in the hearings and stuff like that. Sometimes the courts will allow, especially since COVID, they will allow remote testimony. So the person who's incarcerated can appear on a video kind of program. Sometimes we can get the person transferred to and allowed to come into court for that particular hearing. They will be brought into court. Um, but but the earning capacity while you're in jail,
Yeah.
the resources it takes to hire a lawyer for your criminal criminal case, to deal with that often starts out of some marital assets, even in the middle of a divorce, because you're allowed to pay attorney fees out of your assets if necessary. And so how does that impact the pot that the court's going to try to divide, or that we're going to try to negotiate, if somebody needs more money during the divorce because of criminal conduct? And so that's really. And then if you're in jail, you don't get to see your kids usually.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So if I come to you and I say, "Hey, I just got arrested for something,"
Mhm,
um, what it's our client.
mhm,
What should they do? I mean,
mhm.
not you don't just give up and say, "Okay, let them have everything," or "I don't want to have this," or "I don't deserve this." I mean, there's got to be a way to kind of help that situation,
Yeah.
even if you're
I
the one who did it.
Yeah, I talk to my clients about the 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 amends and rehabilitation kind of uh, way to deal with it. So if they've been arrested for uh, an abuse issue that's a physical violence kind of stuff, are you in therapy? Are you doing anger management? Do that proactively, even if you haven't been convicted yet. Let's get you into classes about, let's get you into therapy. Let's get you into all of the different resources that are out there, um, uh, so that we can show the court that you really have remorse for the conduct that you're being accused of or that you've been convicted of. And sometimes I say that, they say, "Well, I've been convicted of it. I didn't do it." I said, "But you're going to tell the court that you'll do whatever it takes to have time with your kids, or to show that this was a one of." And that means that if there's a class out there that could help you, even if you didn't do this conduct, but it will educate you and help you, we can show the court you're so invested in the outcome of your case, you're willing to do things and whatever it takes to show the court that that was a one of, or that you're changing, or that sort of thing. I mean, there are ways that we can really help people that have had uh, prior convictions or current issues. Um, but it's always a partnership between what the lawyer can tell you can happen and what the our client is willing to do.
Right, right.
So
The that makes sense. Because again, you were saying like things can happen and they can happen afterwards. So what if you get sentenced to a year in jail and you have child support, you have spouse support, or you are
yeah,
getting child or spouse support? I mean, what how can that be resolved?
yeah.
Someone's in jail,
Generally,
they can't pay.
yeah, they can't pay. Generally, while you are incarcerated, your duty to pay support is suspended. until 60 days after you get out of your sentence. So it doesn't accrue, it just stops. And that's a real hardship on the spouse who was depending on the parent that was depending on the uh, child support or spousal support. It's a real hardship. And and then, of course, whatever your parenting time was is going to be impacted by the fact that you probably won't have parenting time, especially depending on where you are incarcerated. There's, a prison over in Ontario, Oregon, and so if your family's here in Portland and you're in Ontario, Oregon, that's an 8-hour drive.
Yeah.
So the ability for the children to come visit under, limited circumstances is none,
Yeah. Yeah.
most of the time, most of the
Yeah.
time.
Wow. Well, we have just blown through 30 minutes,
We
and
always do.
we always do. And this was just such a fascinating topic because there's so many ins and outs. And oh, this wasn't that bad. I mean, they're saying I was, stinking drunk and I got a ticket and well, I only had 3 beers when I took them in, so I couldn't have been that drunk. I mean, it's not just the conviction, it's that the habit you have. It's what the way you're doing stuff, and that's what you just talked about. That
Right,
underlying part you got to get to.
right, right. And the court's going to want to show, and your spouse is going to want to, if we're not going to court, we're going to try to negotiate or mediate this. Your spouse wants to see that you are committed to being safer for your children
Yeah,
or more trustworthy with money or
yeah,
all,
all of the
uh,
above.
all of the above.
I like that. I like that. Wow. Thank you, Kim. This was
Thank you, Steve.
wonderful. Thank you for talking to us about this today. It was once
Yeah.
again something that needs to be kind of heard. So thanks for talking about it.
Yeah, thanks for asking. See you next time.
And I will ask you any question you ever want on this show. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. If anyone has any further questions on today's topic, you can post it. We can get you connected with an attorney. And until next time, stay safe, stay happy, be well, don't commit a crime.